we've been here a long time. We've gotten far afield. We've had a sermon and talked about politics. Any specific gun questions?
The circuit rider left for his next.
Exactly.
I want to go back to the school. My question about the school, Senator Tom's got in there and was talking about, prospective things that haven't come yet. But as far as what is a school, what isn't a school, in the law, what's the definition of a school, where you can carry, where you can't, how do campuses fall in there, how do daycares fall in there, stuff like that.
From a penal provision, meaning where you can carry a gun at, and if you do, it's a criminal act. Look at the gun-free school zone of federal legislation, which is about 921 or 922 of the U.S. Code. It defers to the state definition to decide, which gets nuts if you try to research this. It defers to what a school is by how the state defines it. But essentially in Indiana, the federal government, if they chose to prosecute you, if you're carrying a handgun without a license and or illegally in anywhere from pre-K or Head Start programs all the way through high school, it's a crime under federal law. The federal government doesn't do a lot. They pick very specific things they focus on. Right now it's drugs and guns, and not guns in the standpoint of who's carrying a gun in a school zone. They're focusing on huge numbers of guns that are being illegally bought and sold. At least that's the argument. So you're unlikely to get prosecuted in federal court with a gun crime even if you violate it. Under state law, believe it or not, state law is more restrictive than federal law on where you can carry a gun or not. The Newsom case reflects that, which is a guy that had a license. He's at a high school. He needs to go in, so he leaves the handgun on the driver's seat or the passenger seat of the car and goes in. A security guard sees it, calls the police, and he was convicted for having a firearm in a school zone. Indiana doesn't make an exception for a licensee except while you're operating a motor vehicle. Just as the concealed carry on campus can't get up enough gumption to change that, Indiana's law wasn't intended to be that way, but in Indiana, it's a Class D felony, license or not, if you possess a handgun on school property, unless you're operating the motor vehicle to drop someone off or not. Indiana, as far as colleges and universities go, it is not included under Indiana's penal or the federal penal act. However, here's how it's played out. And this is the reality of it. You don't have to like it or not. I'm just telling you how it really plays out. If you're a student, every student handbook is going to have a prohibition against having a gun on campus. If they find it, they're going to suspend you and throw you out. If you're an employer or you're an employee and you work for the university, and I've watched this happen across a number of different universities, they don't want to follow the bring your gun to work bill. So employers, including universities, have taken the position, well, we haul or we have an x-ray machine, therefore we're accepted out under nuclear power and are waiting for someone to come in and challenge that. So if you're an employee, you're not going to be able to carry there. If you are a student, you're not going to be able to carry there. If you're a random person and you're carrying there, they're going to make you leave if they catch you, if you're a visitor to the university. There's been a huge desire for a long time to allow concealed carry on campuses. In a few states it's been allowed, a few states it's a criminal act. This definition of a safe school zone is broader and includes the university. I don't see it happening in a long time because the liberal mindset, I'm being an academic, if I could collect every gun and know that no one would ever die of a gun crime again in the U.S., would I be willing to do it? Maybe. But the reality of it is we've been killing each other in new and more efficient ways since the beginning of this recorded history, and it's always going to be happening that way. And to think naively enough that you can not allow them to be there and therefore guns aren't going to become an issue in your university is a naive belief. The idea is right, theoretically, but it's never going to happen. I don't see it getting passed, at least in Indiana, and I don't ever see the national carry passing Congress. And there are some distinctions between H.R. 218 for law enforcement officers and the civilians at large, meaning in theory, law enforcement officers are held to a certain standard under the search and seizure provision of the Fourth Amendment, and they're also held to some universal minimum training standards. So that's the reality of how it plays out. It's in colleges and universities and in schools from pre-K or early Head Start all the way through high school, it's a criminal act, and I don't see that likely changing. What I would love to do, and I talked to Matt Dorr, who's Senator Tom's legislative assistant, maybe 2 weeks ago. I'd love to write a law. Florida has a pretty clean law. They basically repealed it all and started again. A really clean law for what's criminal and what's not criminal in the firearms realm, but I don't see that happening either. Have I answered your question on those colleges, universities?
Sure. What about like Sunday schools?
Churches are a real pickle. I've spent hours on those distinctions. In theory, if there's a school there, and there's actually some case law that might contradict that, but if there's a school, a licensed school or daycare operating at the church, it would appear it falls under the more restrictive Indiana provision that would disallow and make it a penal act to have a gun there. I've not exhaustively researched that. I probably spent 100 hours on that topic. Then the issue is whether or not the freedom of religion, how does that play in against the freedom or the right to keep and bear arms? I don't know that that case has been decided, but to a reasonable certainty, it's probably illegal to have a gun on a church property if in fact there's any kind of school that's associated with it that's licensed.
Yeah.
Sure. Just out of curiosity, then, would there be anything in Indiana that would prevent a completely privately funded university from allowing students to carry if they chose to?
Yes, because how it's defined, you can go far enough back. It's like trying to find the definition of a school bus. There's like 10 different definitions under Indiana law. There's one in transportation. There's one in a part of the Public School Act. The answer is ultimately it would still have to be regulated through the Department of Education. At least that's my belief. Even homeschools are. And that is what the trip would be to having a totally private school and having that exception.
But what about like not necessarily the parochial level, but adult education, college levels? I gotta say, I think Hillsdale is a completely privately funded adult education facility. Would they be allowed to if they wanted to, if they were in Indiana?
On that set of facts, if the university allowed it, it appears the answer would be yes if they allowed it. I'm unfamiliar with any university, though, or college that's allowed it. Typically, the calls I'm getting are from the students that want to find a way to get a movement organized, or from attorneys that represent the university figuring out how it is that they're able to not allow students to carry there. And I give them the dead in the middle answer. This is the law, you don't like it or change it, but this is what the law is, probably.
Yes, sir.
So, could Indiana legally, under federal law, allow carry on pre-K through 12 school property?
Federal law, you'd have to do some dancing. Federal law defers to those definitions and refers to this how they're defined under state law. So you'd have to play around with how they're defined under state law. The answer is probably yes, but the real problem in Indiana right now isn't the federal law. It's the federal law would actually allow a lot broader group of people to carry in and around school property. The state law is what the problem is in Indiana. It's very restrictive. More questions?
Regarding a licensed daycare or licensed preschool employees, can you have a gun secured in the car in the parking lot? Facilities?
And actually, they're specifically, and I pulled that out a minute ago when we were talking about it, and I lost my page here. Schools, for the workplace exception, have a specific exception, and I believe it also includes, I haven't looked at it for a while because it's a total mess. You get to the point, you go back into the Indiana Administrative Code, and it gets to the point it's circular. I couldn't figure it out, and I spent hours on it. But I believe licensed daycare are specifically accepted and are not allowed to have a person carry on there. Let me just pull it out here, I'll tell you. For the exclusions. There are a lot of them. Shelter here. Child care centers are accepted out altogether. And children's homes are child care institutions, so the answer is probably not. The more specific law would control the more general.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
How is it legally that one state, that my driver's license is good in Indiana, but my handgun permit, and my driver's license is good in Ohio, but Ohio won't recognize, kind of going back into the, I'm sure, is there a simple?
I think I can answer that.
I'll give you a simple one, Brian. What's the meaning of life?
I think I can answer that. When there isn't, my suspicion is under federal funding that allows funding for highways, there's a requirement, or under the Commerce Clause, because cars move between interstate commerce, somewhere there's a requirement that requires one state to honor another state's driver's license.
Marriage license then.
Yeah, there is no federal requirement that a state, and if you look in the U.S. Code, it's about 930, 18 U.S.C. 930. It specifically says Congress is not preempting the field of firearms. States can regulate. Congress has not passed a national carry law. Therefore, it's up to the state. So it takes one state attorney general talking to the other state attorney general, or it can be the Secretary of State, the chief of police. For those of you who are Floridians, is that the word? They have some goofy, the Department of Agriculture covers firearms in Florida, which I never understood. If you really want to know how it happened, is it probably generates a big income stream, and somebody fought about what department got to get that income stream. That's probably the honest truth about it. But typically those two states work together and say, we want to have a treaty with you. It's called a compact between two states to allow your license to be reciprocal here and there. The difference between a driver's license is the federal government, I'm sure, somehow through one of the parts of the Commerce Clause requires states to allow and cooperate with each other's driver's licenses. Nobody disagrees or disputes much about the value of cars, but they do about guns. More questions?
Tell you what, why don't we, went to form, but we'll just draw a line under the formal portion of it, because some of you are probably suffering from tired tail feathers. And if you want to stick around and draw, or you guys just got to get rolling.
I'll hang around for a few minutes if somebody.
Okay.
You got some.
So we'll just draw a line under the formal portion of it, and then we'll stay for a while and coffee clash. It's fine.